Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered why some organizations just operate like this perfectly tuned engine, while others are constantly misfiring, plagued by missed deadlines and endless misunderstandings? Well, today we're going to treat workplace communication exactly like what it is, the nervous system of a complex machine. We'll be exploring exactly how information keeps an organization alive, functioning, and actually thriving. Because as our source material points out, without this flow of information, it would be incredibly difficult for any organization to simply survive.
So, here is our game plan for today. First, we'll dissect the communication loop. Next, we'll map how information flows, followed by the power of communication. Then, we'll establish the 7 C's, and finally, we'll look at breaking down barriers.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the communication loop, or the micro level of meaning. To really understand the whole machine, we first need to zoom all the way in and look at the microscopic unit of human interaction. Communication is officially defined as the transference and the understanding of meaning among individuals. And honestly, the absolute key word there is understanding. You can talk all day long, you can send 100 emails, but if the meaning isn't grasped by the person on the receiving end, communication simply hasn't happened. It's a two-way street of shared meaning.
Every single message follows a very specific loop. Picture this. It starts with a sender who has a thought. They have to actually encode that thought into a format, like typing out an email or putting together a presentation. Then they choose a channel to transmit it. The receiver gets this message and has to decode it, breaking it down to extract the real meaning. And finally, we have feedback. This is crucial because it confirms the message wasn't just received, but actually understood. If any single step in this process fails, the whole loop breaks down.
Now, a major threat to this loop is what we call noise. But noise isn't just, loud construction outside your window. According to our source, noise is anything in the environment that interferes with or distorts the message. That means it can be physical, sure, but it can absolutely be psychological too. For instance, if a coworker is dealing with intense personal stress, that psychological noise can cause them to completely misread a perfectly encoded, clear memo. This microloop ultimately builds into 2 parallel systems within any company. On one hand, we have formal communication. These are the official, management-endorsed channels that, let's be honest, can sometimes get bogged down by rigid red tape. On the other hand, we have informal communication. These are the social channels created organically by the employees themselves. And what's really fascinating is that this informal network actually supplements the formal one. It cuts through the rigid bureaucracy and keeps the organization breathing and moving efficiently. When a sender is ready to encode a message, they've got a massive menu of options. They can use oral communication, like a face-to-face meeting, written memos, electronic tools, or even traditional methods. Everything from town criers to writing on stones. Seriously, the text actually points that out. But I want you to pay special attention to active listening. Listening isn't passive. It is a highly dynamic type of communication that requires actively paying attention, interpreting, and remembering.
Okay, moving on to Section 2. How information flows, our macro-level nervous system.
Let's pan out to look at the entire office floor and see how these messages physically travel. Information basically flows in 4 main directions. Downward flow is your classic chain of command, boss down to employee. Upward flow relies on things like suggestion boxes or grievance procedures, moving up the ladder to give management feedback. Horizontal flow happens laterally among peers at the exact same level, but arguably the most dynamic is crosswise communication. This is the diagonal flow that connects entirely different departments and seniority levels.
There's this one specific quote from the source material that I just love, because it hits the nail on the head regarding modern work. Quote, "Usually those engaged in crosswise communication have no direct relationship and the information flow does not follow the chain of command. Crosswise communication actively breaks traditional, rigid hierarchies to coordinate complex tasks and just get things done across departmental lines. It is the ultimate workaround when the formal structure is moving too slow."
Which brings us to Section 3, the power of communication, why information is the absolute lifeblood of the organization. So why should we care about all this routing, encoding, and mapping on a daily basis? Well, because communication does the heavy lifting for the entire business. Management relies on it to gather data and explain policies. It motivates morale, it monitors performance, and provides a crucial outlet for grievances. Without this nervous system firing correctly, conflicts just go unresolved, departments fall completely out of sync, and the entire organization begins to fail.
All right, Section 4, the 7 C's. These are our fundamental principles for effective messaging.
Let's dive into the rules of the road.
According to our source, there are essential elements that absolutely must be present for a message to land effectively. If you're constantly finding yourself trapped in endless email chains just trying to clarify a simple point, or your messages are always missing the mark, you are highly likely violating one of these 7 foundational principles.
Here is your ultimate checklist, the 7 C's. Your message must be concrete, meaning grounded in reality, and correct in its timing and context. Keep it concise and brief, while ensuring absolute clarity by dropping all that confusing technical jargon. Always, always maintain courtesy. In fact, the text wisely advises that if you're angry, it is much better to just keep mute. Ensure completeness so your listener isn't left scratching their head with unanswered questions. And finally, show consideration for their specific background and education level. Checking your messages against this framework practically guarantees success in that decoding phase we talked about.
Finally, Section 5, Breaking Down Barriers, where we learn how to troubleshoot the machine.
So what happens when things still go wrong? Knowing how to fix the machine requires us to identify common impediments, which we can divide into 2 main categories. First up are the human factors, the interpersonal barriers. Emotional problems like frustration, fear, or mistrust make it virtually impossible for someone to decode your message properly. Differences in age or social status can easily block understanding. And honestly, even something as simple as poor listening skills or an active conflict will immediately freeze the flow of information.
But hey, the problem isn't always human error. The second category is systemic barriers, where the organization itself gets in the way. Communication overload happens when managers are simply buried under way too much data to process. A poor organizational structure with a miles-long chain of command completely stifles upward and downward flow. Even a bad physical office layout can isolate employees. If you fail to plan, or you choose an inappropriate channel, like say sending highly sensitive feedback over a quick text message, the whole system breaks down.
Before we wrap up, I want to zero in on one specific interpersonal barrier that causes so much unnecessary grief: semantics. The source explicitly notes, quote, "A breakdown in communication can occur in interpretation as a result of misunderstanding, since words can have various meanings, and those used by one person can be interpreted by another in a way contrary to what was intended. People attach entirely different meanings to the exact same words. Navigating semantics is just a massive hurdle that we have to actively manage, mostly by adhering to those 7 C's, especially clarity and consideration." While we have covered a ton of ground today, you now understand the anatomy of how a message travels, how it is encoded and decoded, and how easily it can be destroyed by physical noise, emotional barriers, or even a bad office layout. The organizational machine only runs when meaning is genuinely shared. So, looking at your own daily interactions at work, you really have to ask yourself, are you truly communicating, or are you just adding to the noise? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you take these principles back to your own workplace.